Well, hello there, this is Tamil, and today we're going to talk about pastels and chalk in Clip Studio Paint. You can either watch the video or read the article. Let's just get started. The first thing you need to do is obviously create a canvas. I have a simple 2x3K. If you click P, you're going to find this little icon, or it's going to look like this, and you want to go into the pastel section. These are the default brushes that Clip Studio Paint comes with that are going to be as close as possible to pastels or chalk. So what does make these brushes special? Well, they're just very heavy in texture, and you can really see the little things that they leave behind, and I think it looks pretty cool. And the only thing that if you have a slow computer, and depending on the canvas size, if you want to make it bigger, so something like this, it's going to lag a little bit, and it's hard to paint like this if you want to make big brush strokes, which what I did for my painting that you will see later. And in order to fix that, I just decided to hunt around for another brush that was on Clip Studio Marketplace. And I found this one that I really liked. It's called Soft Square. You can find it in the link in the description, of course, and I really like how creamy it is and juicy, and it really feels like pastels. And these are the settings that I have for it, and the only thing I can say is to keep in mind that if you're going to use it, you can see that I'm going over the same area 3 or 4 times, but the gaps are kind of the same no matter what you do. So if you, let's say, move it just a bit, now it's going to cover them because it's actually using the texture in the same spot every time you use your brush. It's not a good or a bad thing, but it's just to keep it in mind. And if you want to kind of tweak it, some of your layers, you can just go ahead, do this, Control T, and skew it just a bit. And that will give you a less repetitive pattern as you go, and I think that really works best. So let's talk about starting a painting. So in real life, pastels are not used on white paper because it leaves these big gaps that are easy to see and they just kind of look messy, and that is why I use the texture for my background. Just like in my last tutorial for watercolor, I just dropped an image and I used it as a background for my entire piece. So I just drag and drop, and here it is. Command A, Control C, go into my previous file, and Control V for paste, and that is going to be my texture. I can make it bigger or smaller depending on my preference, and this is going to give me a lot better blending and a more naturalistic look to it. And you can download this texture. Actually, I scanned it myself, put it on Gumroad. You can follow the link and use it however you like. It is about 6K by 5K pixels, and I adjusted it in software to look better because there were some things that were not sharp enough and textures were lost. Go ahead and use that if you want. In order to start the painting, I'm just gonna scale it down to fit the canvas better. So we got the texture, we got the brush. What else can we think about when we do pastels? Well, the thing is, if you do pastels and you want to delete something, a great thing to remember, just like with watercolor, use a textured eraser. Don't use soft, don't use round, because it will very look too obvious, like it is if you used digital. But, you know, kneaded eraser, I really like this one. You can use this to add some texture variety to your painting. Another thing is that because it's mid-tone, because it's pastels, I think pastels are really interesting because you can use very bright colors, be in a good spot when you put them together next to each other. That's what I would recommend people doing. For blacks, you know, you don't want to use too much black. I really like using the black as the outline. So let's say I want to paint an apple later. You know, say this is going to be the highlight and this is going to be the shadow. Obviously, you want to hide the line layer later, but if it's pastels, I feel like it's more interesting to actually use it on top. So you want to have more little accidents like this that will help you to create a more traditional look to this, and have the lines in there left over, and then being very careful about removing them as you go on with your painting. And that brings us to another thing is that I sometimes use the selection tool because I want to keep my brush big, but also make the mark there. Because if you do this, it feels a little bit more natural instead of if I actually had the brush small and I'm trying to paint it like that. It just doesn't give the same effect. So I would use that if I were you. And I also want to talk about lost edges. And I have actually an example that I made before this. This kind of deserves its own video and its own explanation, and I will link another video in the description if you want to check that out. And so these are the spheres that I painted, and I think the main idea is that when you have a lot of values, you want to group them together. So if you have like 11 grays, what if you don't have 11 grays and you have like 4 or 3? And that is the main idea behind hard or soft edges. And you want to make a clear conscious choice. Where do you want it? So for example, here, I'm not saying this is like the best way to do it with a sphere, but I'm just making an example of what could be done. And I blended the bottom a bit, I blended this part a bit, and I blended really like a lot on the edge of the sphere right here. You can really see this one. It basically almost gets lost, but because everything else is intact, like this edge is here, this edge is here, and there's this big highlight, it still reads as a sphere in the end. And that is what I would use if I were doing like pastels. Because it's heavy in texture, it's a little bit hard to do all like the details, because I like to do pastels, and in real life they're very big. The pastel is actually, if you think about it, pastels are very hard to work with because they're big, thick squares or circles. And the only thing you can do with them is you can use the whole area right here, or you can use this edge, or you use the entire like circle of it. And that's pretty much all you get, is just the big, and then there's the little bit thick edge, and then the whole entire circle or square. That is basically the point, that it's hard to make small details. So just focus on very vague big shapes when you paint, and try to get the colors right. Because if I'm talking about landscape, it's really easy to get lost with details, but you want to keep in mind the values, how does it look in black and white, other things like that, just like with any regular landscape painting. Try to divide the entire scene into, you know, midground, background, and foreground. Each one should be darker than the other because atmospheric perspective. So it should be black, it could be gray, and this should be white. And this will give you better understanding of landscape. So let's say there's trees right here, and there's probably a mountain somewhere in the distance. And I will have the painting rolling pretty much soon if you want to check it out and see what I did with this soft square brush, and you want to try it for yourself. Be my guest, it'll be fun, I think. So I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions. And I think the best way to get started with pastels is just to get started. Honestly, it's pretty much the same for everything for me. When I'm not sure about something, I just do it. And for this one, I just grabbed like a fun image that I found. And also, by the way, I made a Pintrest board, I believe, that has a lot of pastel landscape paintings, and you can check it out in the description as well. And it has a lot of variety of people trying that technique with the lost edges. Like you can really see how they're pushing those darks and values, and they don't put too much detail in it. And that's what I liked about it. So hopefully you can maybe try it out for yourself, and happy painting. And here's the time lapse of my landscape.